let's take a look at an introduction to cross-cultural skills. Numerous skills must be nurtured in the quest for cross-cultural competence. Some are very practical, such as communication and decision-making, which may be developed through active practice. Others may be culled by developing habits that cultivate a cross-cultural mindset, and this, in turn, will affect behavior. Cultural skills also include differentiating between the ways in which people are similar to and different from each other, and understanding how they influence human interaction and relationship. Communication is a multifaceted capability that requires skill in speaking and listening, negotiating, resolving conflict, and even understanding and interpreting an entire salient hidden language that conveys meaning. When making decisions, we typically choose from alternatives, usually assuming that we're relying on logic to arrive at the best outcomes or benefit. Most of us, however, don't realize that this is often not logic, but cultural patterns that determine both the way we make decisions and the actual decisions we make. Habits are highly embedded behaviors. Learned and practiced over time, they may lock us into old patterns. Emphasizing, even cultivating new habits can help us develop a cross-cultural mindset. A cross-cultural mindset will help us develop new habits and make new choices in cross-cultural environments. In developing cultural competence, it's important to first look at how people are similar to gain a richer capacity to relate with others. There are basic values that make up the universal requirements of the human condition. The basic values are defined according to underlying motivation. They may also constitute a universal principle that organizes values systems. Basic values are beliefs that are tied to emotion rather than objective ideas. They motivate people to seek and attain desirable goals. Even though they are shared, they may be ordered differently by different people. The pursuit of some goals may conflict with the pursuit of others, while other goals may be pursued congruently. Pursue achievement might conflict with benevolence, but may be congruent with pursuing power. Values that are in proximity in any direction share underlying motivations. Values that are distant from one another are more conflicting in their motivation. People may also be motivated by different sets of values in different areas of life, pursuing one at work and another at home or in their community. This can create tension, stress, or a lack of alignment in their decisions and choices. However, you can create alignment or congruence between values and your life experiences. In this course, we'll focus on learning how to work and interact with cultural difference. Dr. Geert Hofstede is best known for identifying the 6 dimensions of national culture along which nations vary in terms of values. He also identified dimensions of organizational culture that are based upon organizational practices. Hofstede began by studying patterns of thinking or mental programming that every person first begins to acquire in early childhood. One's national cultural foundation builds over time. It's learned, not innate. It does not come from people's genes, but rather from their social environment. Culture is always a collective phenomenon because it's completely or at least partly shared with other people in a social community, by people who live or lived in the same social environment in which it was learned. Culture has been best studied by looking at societies, because societies historically and organizationally develop as forms of social organization. The notion of common culture applies to societies, not to nations. However, cultural researchers tend to study cultural differences at the level of nations because we either survive or are destroyed together. People seek to belong, thus they're drawn to this sense of nationalism, this shared language and ethnicity, even though within nations we see that people have numerous shared values and practices that are similar in minority groups. Culture, Hofstede says, is much like cells in a body. New body cells continually replace old ones throughout a person's life, but the person still exists as a self because their cells share the same genes. Furthermore, values, rather than practices, such as symbols, heroes, and rituals that give evidence to a culture, are the stable element of culture. Thus, research on culture starts with the measurement of a society's values. Dr. Hofstede's work on national cultural dimensions came out of an opportunity to study data of values of IBM employees who worked in 50 countries around the world. Because all employees worked in the same firm, the study had national control over the influence of a company's factors on their values. He found that countries shared common problems, but their solutions differed. Basic problem areas are represented dimensions of culture or aspects that could be measured and compared. Hofstede has been a pioneer in mapping the diversity of human culture. His ideas were first based on a large research project at IBM, which was then expanded across dozens of countries and to other researchers. These studies identified and validated 6 independent dimensions of national culture differences. Power distance describes how well a society handles inequality. It's the extent to which the less powerful members of work organizations and institutions accept and expect the unequal distribution of power. In individualistic societies, people who have weak ties to others are expected to take care of themselves and their families. In collectivist societies, people think of themselves as part of a strong group that often includes extended family. In masculine societies, men are expected to be assertive, tough, and focused on material success. In feminine societies, women are expected to be modest, tender, caring, and concerned with the home and quality of life. In uncertainty-avoiding cultures, people are emotional, anxious, and expressive, even fidgety. People in uncertainty-accepting cultures, on the other hand, may come across as contemplative, quiet, easygoing, and unexpressive. In long-term oriented societies, people foster virtues that emphasize future reward. Short-term oriented societies emphasize the past and the present, respect for tradition, preserving faith, and fulfilling social obligation. Indulgent societies are characterized by the perception that people can act as they please. Societies operating at restraint are characterized by a perception that enjoying leisurely activities and excessive spending are somewhat wrong. Understanding cultural difference is important to your development. Global leaders must be in constant pursuit of cross-cultural communication skills if they're to succeed. We all communicate all the time, so what's at the heart of communication? Typically, it involves a speaker and a listener, and a means of coding and encoding the language of words. Through such an exchange appears on the simple surface, misunderstandings and misinterpretations abound in any communication. Words and nonverbal communication are often open to interpretation of meaning and context. Context is the information that surrounds a communication and helps it to be conveyed, including the framework, background, and surrounding circumstances. The language of context profoundly affects communication in cross-cultural environments. Though we have myriads of cultures around the world, they all fall within 2 basic categories: high context and low context culture. Information that's delivered in high context culture involves highly coded and implicit messages that are difficult for outsiders to interpret. The information is either represented by the physical context or in an internal to the person. Implicit messages usually require a person to read between the lines or interpret nonverbal cues within the greater context of verbal words. In low context culture, on the other hand, most of the communicated information is contained in either explicit codes or the spoken word. Very little is left to be taken for granted by the listener, as the speaker says exactly what they mean. The language of context suggests that people in different cultures interact with and perceive others from wholly different worldviews. So, how do you transcend the barriers to communicating across cultures? Sometimes it takes lifting out of ourselves, our deeply entrenched assumptions that have formed our cultural system, and adopting new principles. Principles are chosen even if they've been ingrained for a long time. Decision-making is a key part of all business practice, and it's part of every person's life. We all make all kinds of decisions as we participate in work and life. A Western approach may be used to logic to consider a situation, assess alternatives, and then systematically select the best fitting solution. However, in cross-cultural situations, what is logical to one person may be circular to others, or vice versa, and the methods and processes used in decision-making are highly affected by culture. Most people will tell you that they really do one of the following when they make decisions. They work incrementally in small steps rather than performing a single powerful analysis. They create simple rules of thumb that simplify the decision-making process. They choose a plausible alternative early rather than continuing to look for the best fit alternative over a long period of time. They procrastinate, they panic, and they sometimes avoid the decision altogether. Interestingly enough, it's these characteristics that are consistent across cultures, not those of the typical rational process. Most decisions that involve cross-cultural scenarios are highly complex, and culture influences how people attempt to simplify this complexity. Hofstede's dimensions of cultural differences can be used to understand the foundation of decision-making across cultures. All 6 of Hofstede's national cultural dimensions have their own influence on decision-making in different culture. Most of us have crafted methods for interacting with our world that define who we are and who we want to be. Habits enable us to conserve energy, make choices about where we invest our resources and spend our time, even limit the bandwidth of freedom and free fall that are all a natural part of life. Habits, too, can limit us as people, managers, and leaders. Our thoughts and deeds become so habituated that we no longer actually see what's in front of us, feel what's going on, or honestly reflect on our own or others' words and actions. There are successful habits that we can learn in order to develop new cross-cultural skills and cultivate a cross-cultural mindset. This, in turn, will enable us to better relate in cross-cultural relationships and environments. The ability to function in a state of ambiguity is very helpful because the manifestations of different cultures can seem strange to us, and it rules mysteries or contradictory. To function effectively across cultural differences, it's important to keep an open mind while observing the experiencing of different ways of living. Strive to accept and even celebrate differences. A firm grounding in your own culture without acquiring a feeling of superiority provides the necessary confidence to venture into understanding another culture. Having humility and humanity makes you more approachable, while at the same time enabling you to refrain from quickly judging others. Instead, you can learn from them. Arrogance is the enemy of learning. Having empathy and the ability to put oneself in the shoes of others can be very helpful in bridging the cultural gap between people. Empathy comes from having interest in people and not merely in material things or pure concepts. Curiosity about other people will help you see them as separate and see them for who they really are as opposed to your own preconceptions as reflections of yourself. Creativity helps you think outside the box so you can both appreciate the new ways you're seeing into the other culture and come up with new ways to adapt to it and effectively deal with it. The desire and ability to communicate are crucial to functioning effectively across cultural differences.